Imagine hiking peacefully in the wilderness when one small mistake triggers a deadly chain of events. These chilling stories reveal how innocent actions like whispering to a dog or unsecured food led to fatal grizzly bear encounters. Explore the tragic moments when nature turned deadly, forever changing lives instantly. On May 10, 2023, Sarah, an experienced hiker, decided to explore a remote forest trail near the edge of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. She had hiked through these woods many times, always feeling at peace in nature. Sarah was an avid outdoors woman, often venturing into the wilderness to clear her mind and reconnect with nature. She was well prepared for the journey, carrying all the essentials in her backpack and ensuring her dog Max, a loyal border collie, was by her side. Max was Sarah's constant companion, and together they had trekked many miles through different terrains, building a strong bond over the years. Sarah's trail was relatively quiet that day, with only birds and the wind rustling through the trees. It was the perfect setting for a peaceful hike, and Sarah enjoyed the forest's serenity. Max trotted ahead as she walked, sniffing the ground as always. Although alert, Sarah was relaxed, taking in the beauty of the surrounding forest. She occasionally whispered to Max to keep him close, ensuring he stayed near her on the trail. But just as they approached a bend in the trail, Sarah whispered to Max, urging him to stay close. Her voice and Max's movement startled a massive grizzly bear hidden nearby. Feeling threatened by the sudden noise and movement, the bear reacted instinctively, charging them with incredible speed. Sarah had no time to respond. The bear was on her before she could even process what was happening. The grizzly's powerful charge knocked Sarah to the ground, sending her sprawling. Max, always protective of Sarah, tried to defend her, barking fiercely at the bear to scare it away. But the bear was too strong and quickly overpowered Max, knocking him aside. The bear then returned to Sarah, still on the ground. It mauled her relentlessly, its sharp claws and powerful jaws tearing into her body. Sarah struggled, but she was no match for the bear's strength. Max, though injured, continued to bark, trying to protect Sarah, but his efforts were futile. The bear's claws ripped through Sarah's clothes and skin, leaving deep gashes on her arms, torso, and legs. Despite her desperate attempts to crawl away, the bear continued its attack until it finally retreated after what felt like an eternity. The bear left, disappearing into the woods, leaving Sarah severely wounded and barely conscious. Max, still alive but shaken, lay beside her, too weak to help further. Sarah's breathing became shallow as she struggled to stay conscious. She could feel the pain in every part of her body, but she couldn't move. The sounds of the forest seemed distant, and her vision blurred. It was clear that Sarah's injuries were severe. Max stayed close to her, but there was nothing he could do. Hours later, rescuers found Sarah's lifeless body with deep gashes and severe trauma from the bear's claws and teeth. Max, though shaken and hurt, was safe. The bear was never found, and authorities warned other hikers about the potential danger of encountering a grizzly in such a vulnerable area. The aftermath of Sarah's tragic encounter with the grizzly bear left a lasting impact on those who knew her, as well as on the hiking community in the area. The authorities, after investigating the attack, confirmed the severity of Sarah's injuries and how quickly the bear had acted. They reported that the bear had attacked with little warning, likely because it felt threatened by the movement and noise caused by Sarah and Max. It was a grim reminder of the unpredictable nature of wild animals, especially when they feel cornered or alarmed. The area where Sarah was attacked was known for having bears, and hikers were often reminded to stay vigilant. However, the unfolding events were still shocking to many, especially since Sarah was experienced and had hiked in similar environments for years. The park rangers and wildlife officials quickly responded, but the bear was never found despite their efforts. It was believed that the bear, likely a mother with cubs, retreated to a more secluded forest after the attack. Max, Sarah's dog, had been a loyal companion on countless hikes. Though shaken and injured, Max survived the ordeal. The bond between Sarah and Max had been a source of strength during their hikes, and it was clear that Max had tried his best to protect Sarah. After the attack, Max was taken to a local veterinarian to ensure he was physically okay, but the emotional toll of the event would take longer to heal. He had witnessed the attack on his beloved owner, and the trauma was evident in his behavior. In the months following the attack, local authorities increased their efforts to educate hikers and campers about bear safety. They urged them to avoid hiking alone, especially in areas with bear populations. They also stressed the importance of carrying bear spray and tools that could have helped Sarah during her encounter. Sarah's tragic loss served as a harsh reminder of the risks involved in hiking in bear country, leading to a greater focus on ensuring the safety of hikers and wildlife in the area. As for Sarah, her death left a hole in the hearts of all who knew her. Her legacy as a passionate hiker and nature lover would live on in the memories of those who had the privilege of sharing the trails with her. Her story would be remembered as a cautionary tale and a tribute to her love for the wild and the adventurous spirit she carried with her. On October 15, 2023, Tom, an experienced fisherman, set off for a solo fishing trip in a remote part of the river, far from the nearest towns. Tom had been fishing for many years and was well versed in the outdoors. He knew how to read the land, the weather, and the animals. But that day, as he ventured into a secluded area in the wilderness, he faced a danger he hadn't expected. The river was quiet, and Tom often visited it for its peace and the chance to fish undisturbed. He was fishing alone as usual, enjoying the solitude and the thrill of casting his line into the cool waters. The area was known for its beautiful surroundings, surrounded by thick forests and cliffs. However, it was also an area where wildlife, especially bears, were known to roam. Bears often visited the riverbanks, drawn to the abundance of fish and the quiet atmosphere. Tom, however, had always felt safe in these surroundings, trusting his knowledge of the outdoors to keep him safe. Signs warned about bear activity in the area, but Tom dismissed them, thinking that his experience would protect him. As Tom cast his line into the water, he was completely unaware of the danger creeping up behind him. He focused intently on the water, his mind lost in the rhythm of fishing. The air was still, and the river's gentle flow was the only sound. Suddenly, without any warning, Tom heard a rustling sound from behind. Before he could react, a black bear lunged at him, its massive form coming from the dense trees. The bear attacked with incredible speed. Tom barely had time to turn around before the bear struck, knocking him to the ground. In an instant, he felt a sharp pain across his chest as the bear swiped at him with its powerful claws. The force of the attack caused severe bleeding, and Tom could feel his strength draining away. He scrambled to defend himself, pulling out a small knife he had carried for emergencies. However, the bear's attack was too powerful. Tom's attempts to use the knife to ward off the bear were ineffective. The bear's jaws snapped, and Tom screamed in pain as it bit into his chest, causing deep, life-threatening injuries. Despite his efforts to fight back, the bear's attack continued. Tom could feel the blood pouring from his wounds as he tried to push the bear away. The wind carried his cries for help, but no one was nearby to hear. Tom, alone and vulnerable, struggled against the bear's relentless assault. The bear only retreated after several moments, likely realizing that Tom was no longer a threat. By that time, however, Tom's injuries were severe, and he lay motionless on the ground, weakened by the blood loss. After realizing that Tom posed no further danger, the bear disappeared into the woods, leaving the fisherman in a critical state. The violence of the attack now overshadowed the peaceful surroundings. Tom's blood stained the ground, a grim reminder of the danger lurking in the wild. Despite the bear retreating, the damage had already been done. Tom's condition was dire, and it was only a matter of time before help could arrive. Tom's fishing trip, meant to be a quiet retreat into nature, had turned into a fight for survival. The consequences of underestimating the power of the wild were now clear. As Tom lay there, severely injured, he knew that his chances of survival depended on the quick arrival of help. However, his hope faded with no one around and the wilderness surrounding him. As Tom lay bleeding on the ground, his body growing weaker by the second, the realization of his vulnerable situation sank in. His mind raced, but his body felt like it was shutting down. The deep cuts and gashes from the bear's claws were quickly becoming a deadly wound. Tom tried to stay conscious, but the blood loss was overwhelming. His vision blurred, and the coldness of the forest began to settle into his bones. The wilderness he had once felt home in now seemed like a vast, indifferent place. Tom knew he needed help. His body was giving out, and his attempts to move were weak and uncoordinated. The pain from the bear's bite was intense, and his chest felt heavy with each breath. His legs, still in motion from his attempts to crawl, grew numb from the shock. The sound of the river seemed distant now, as if the world was slowly closing in around him. He struggled to lift his head, but the effort felt too much. The once serene surroundings had turned into a place of peril, with Tom trapped alone and in critical condition. He thought of his family and friends, wondering if they would ever know what happened. Would anyone find him in time? His mind began to drift as if the weight of his situation was pulling him into a state of numbness. But Tom held on to the thought that help would come. He had to believe that. Somewhere, someone would notice his absence and come looking for him. He clung to that hope despite the overwhelming sense of despair. Meanwhile, Tom's partner had grown worried when he did not return after some time. He knew Tom was experienced and had always been cautious in the wild, but this time, something felt different. Tom's absence stretched longer than usual, and concern set in. Tom's partner had tried to contact him by phone, but there was no response. With no sign of Tom, he decided to search for him, knowing something must have gone wrong. He gathered his things quickly and set off toward the river. Hours passed before Tom's partner reached the area where Tom had been fishing. The silence in the woods was broken only by the sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush. As he moved deeper into the forest, he called out for Tom, but there was no answer. The unease in his gut grew, and he picked up his pace. Then, as he reached the spot where Tom had been, he saw the blood on the ground. It was clear that something terrible had happened. Tom's partner rushed to the area, calling again, hoping for a response. When he saw Tom's lifeless form lying near the riverbank, he froze. The sight of Tom, covered in blood, with deep claw marks on his chest and leg, was a chilling confirmation of what had happened. His heart sank as he realized that a bear had attacked Tom. There was no time to waste. Tom's partner quickly contacted emergency services, giving them the location as he tried to stop the bleeding. But it was clear that help had come too late. The helicopter arrived hours later, but Tom was already gone. His injuries were too severe, and he had bled out before help could reach him. The bear, having retreated into the forest, was not found. Authorities later tracked the animal's movements but were unable to locate it. They warned other hikers and campers about the risks of bear encounters, reminding everyone to be vigilant and follow proper safety guidelines when in bear country. Tom's tragic death left a lasting impact on his family and friends, who struggled to cope with the sudden loss. His story served as a reminder of the dangers that can arise in the wilderness, even for the most experienced outdoor enthusiasts. Despite his years of knowledge, Tom had fallen victim to the unpredictability of nature. His passing highlighted the importance of always respecting the wild, no matter how familiar one may be with it. On a cool autumn evening in September 2023, Greg and his 10-year-old son, Jason, set off for a father-son camping trip in the rugged mountains of Wyoming. The area was known for its beautiful trails and scenic views, making it a perfect getaway for the duo. Greg, a seasoned outdoor enthusiast, had been camping for years, teaching Jason the essentials of survival in the wilderness. Jason, eager to follow in his father's footsteps, had quickly grown fond of these trips. The two of them had spent countless hours hiking and exploring, strengthening their bond with each adventure. They set up camp near a popular trail, surrounded by towering pines and the distant sounds of nature. The evening was peaceful, with only the sounds of the wind rustling through the trees. They enjoyed a simple meal around the campfire, chatting and laughing as they talked about their day. Afterward, they settled into their tent for the night, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Greg, who had been on many camping trips before, knew the importance of securing food properly to avoid attracting wildlife. Still, on this night, they needed to follow the necessary precautions. The food scraps from their meal were left out and must be properly sealed as they should have been. This oversight would soon prove to be a costly mistake. As night deepened, Greg and Jason lay in their sleeping bags, the soft sounds of the forest outside providing a sense of calm. But around midnight, a rustling noise outside the tent broke the silence. At first, Greg thought it was just the wind, but the sound grew louder and more persistent. His heart raced as he realized that something was approaching their camp. He slowly reached for the flashlight and, without making any noise, carefully peered out of the tent. His breath caught in his throat when he saw the dark shape of a bear just outside, sniffing around the area where they had left their food. The bear, likely a mother with her cubs, had been drawn by the scent of the leftover food, and now it was closing in on their campsite. Greg's instincts kicked in, and he knew he had to act fast. He whispered to Jason, urging him to stay quiet and remain still. Greg, despite knowing the dangers, attempted to scare the bear away by calling out to it in a loud voice. The bear, feeling threatened by his sudden presence, did not retreat. Instead, it perceived Greg as dangerous to her cubs and quickly attacked. The bear lunged toward Greg, knocking him to the ground with the force of a freight train. Greg tried to defend himself, but the bear's claws and teeth tore into his chest and arms, leaving deep, painful gashes. In the chaos, Jason, terrified but not knowing what to do, instinctively played dead. He lay as still as possible, hoping that the bear would lose interest and move away. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched the bear maul his father, but he remained motionless. praying that he would survive the terrifying ordeal. The bear, after what seemed like an eternity, finally retreated. Greg, badly injured, struggled to move but was unable to get up. His wounds were severe, and the pain was overwhelming. Still in shock, Jason quickly crawled to his father's side, desperately trying to help, but Greg was too weak to respond. Hours later, other campers who had heard the commotion arrived and called for help. Emergency services responded quickly, and Greg was airlifted to the hospital, where he was treated for multiple injuries. His shoulder, chest, and arms were badly mauled, and he required several surgeries to stabilize his condition. Despite the efforts of medical professionals, his recovery would take months, and the scars, both physical and emotional, would last a lifetime. Jason, although unharmed physically, was deeply affected by the attack. The trauma of watching his father suffer and knowing how close he came to losing him left a lasting mark on the young boy. The family's story would later serve as a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of wild animals and the importance of being vigilant in bear country. Once Greg was safely in the hospital, the doctors focused on stabilizing his condition. The surgeries were lengthy, and Greg's recovery would be long. His family, friends, and the local community rallied around him, offering support as he slowly regained his strength. His injuries were severe, and while he was expected to survive, the damage to his body was substantial. The trauma to his chest and shoulder required multiple operations, and even with the best care, Greg would never fully return to the man he had been before the attack. Meanwhile, Jason found himself facing his struggles. The mental scars of that night were just as painful as any physical wound. He could not escape the memory of his father's screams and the sight of the bear's powerful jaws. He had always looked up to his father, admiring his strength and knowledge of the outdoors. Now, Jason had to confront that the wilderness was not always the safe, peaceful place he had imagined. In the weeks that followed, Greg's family continued to heal. Greg's physical recovery was slow, but he was determined to regain strength. He reflected on the events, considering what he could have done differently to avoid the bear's attack. His love for the outdoors remained strong, but he knew that he would never take the wilderness for granted again. For Jason, life began to return to a new normal. The trauma of the attack never fully left him, but with the support of his family and friends, he began to move forward. The bond between him and his father grew stronger as they navigated the difficult recovery process together. The experience had changed them both, and they would never forget the terrifying night in the mountains. Greg's story, along with Jason's, served as a reminder of the unpredictable nature of wildlife. The bear attack in the mountains of Wyoming had left its mark on their lives, but it also served as a warning to others. In bear country, it was important to be prepared, stay vigilant, and respect the animals that called it home. The experience shaped Greg and Jason in ways they could never have anticipated, but it also brought them closer, creating a bond forged in the face of danger. On May 23, 2023, Emma, an avid hiker, set out for a solo trek through the dense forests of the Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. Emma had always been passionate about hiking. She had explored various trails across the country, from the towering peaks of the Rockies to the quiet paths of the Appalachian Trail. Her love for nature and the outdoors was unmatched, and she enjoyed the solitude and peace it brought her. She had been hiking for years, and was always careful about respecting wildlife and being aware of her surroundings. This hike was no different. Emma followed a well-known trail in the Great Smoky Mountains, famous for its rich biodiversity and scenic views. She had packed all the necessary gear: water, a first aid kit, a map, and snacks. She enjoyed the sound of the forest around her, the rustling leaves, the chirping of birds, and the distant sound of a stream flowing. As she walked deeper into the forest, she felt a sense of calm, appreciating the untouched beauty around her. However, Emma did not realize she had unknowingly walked too close to a bear den. The dense forest around her provided plenty of cover, and she had no idea that a mother bear and her cubs were nearby. Bears often seek out quiet, secluded areas to rest, and Emma had unwittingly entered one of these spaces. The mother bear, who had been closely watching her cubs, sensed the potential threat as Emma approached too closely. The bear's protective instincts kicked in, and she moved quickly to defend her young. Emma was startled by the sudden movement in the underbrush. Before she could react, the bear emerged from the forest and charged toward her. Emma stumbled backward in a panic, tripping over a tree root and landing hard on the ground. She scrambled to her feet, but the bear was already upon her. The mother bear was on top of Emma in a split second, her powerful paws pinning her down. Emma screamed for help, but the bear's growls drowned her voice. The bear bit into Emma's arm, its sharp teeth tearing through her skin. Emma fought back with everything she had, using her legs and free arm to push at the bear, but the creature's strength was overwhelming. The bear's claws scraped across her skin, causing deep gashes, and the pain was intense. Despite her efforts, Emma could not break free. The bear continued its attack, determined to protect its cubs. Emma's vision blurred, and her body began to feel numb from the shock and pain. She was losing blood quickly, but her mind remained alert as she struggled to stay conscious. As the bear finally backed away, Emma lay on the forest floor, bloodied and weak. The bear had retreated, but Emma was left severely injured. Her cries had gone unheard by anyone nearby as the forest was still and quiet. She was alone in the vast wilderness, her body battered and bruised. It seemed like an eternity before she heard the distant sound of footsteps. Emma tried to call out again, but her voice was faint, barely a whisper. Minutes turned to hours before a rescue team finally found Emma. By the time they reached her, she was traumatized, bloodied, and exhausted. She had managed to survive the terrifying attack, but the physical and emotional scars would stay with her for the rest of her life. Her injuries were severe, and she was immediately airlifted to a hospital for treatment. Emma's love for the wilderness remained strong, but the experience changed her forever. After the attack, Emma's body was weak and in pain. The rescue team worked quickly to stabilize her condition. They carefully bandaged her wounds, trying to stop the bleeding as best as they could. Emma was too exhausted to comprehend what was happening around her fully, but she was grateful for the presence of the rescuers. The team moved her gently onto a stretcher, and she was airlifted out of the forest. The helicopter ride to the hospital was long and bumpy, but Emma remained calm. She felt cold and dizzy, but she could still hear the voices of the medical team around her. She closed her eyes, wishing the pain would stop, but it only seemed to intensify. The physical wounds on her arm and leg were deep, and her body felt like it had been crushed under the weight of the bear's attack. The doctors at the hospital immediately began treating her, performing surgeries to repair the damage done to her muscles and skin. They did their best to stabilize her, but the recovery process would take months. During her stay in the hospital, Emma underwent numerous procedures to heal the deep wounds. The doctors were concerned about infections, so she was put on strong antibiotics. They also worked to prevent permanent nerve damage, which could leave her with lasting mobility issues. Emma's arm and leg were badly bruised and scarred, but her recovery was slow but steady. Her body had been through a lot, but her determination to get better kept her going. As she recovered, Emma found herself struggling emotionally. The trauma of the bear attack lingered in her mind. She had always loved the outdoors, but the memories of that day haunted her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the bear's eyes locked on hers, the pain of the attack overwhelming her senses. Emma knew she would need therapy to help process the trauma, but she was determined to move forward. Months later, Emma was finally able to return to her life. Though she still had scars from the attack, both physical and emotional, she refused to let the bear attack define her. She continued to love hiking in the wilderness, but was now more cautious and prepared. Emma shared her story with others, raising awareness about the importance of safety in bear country. Despite her challenges, she never quit her passion for the outdoors. Her resilience inspired others to be brave in the face of fear, showing that recovery and strength were possible even after a terrifying experience. On the evening of September 17th, 2022, Jack, a solo camper, arrived at his chosen campsite deep in the wilderness of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. Jack was an experienced outdoorsman, well prepared for his wilderness adventure. He had spent years camping, hiking, and learning the ins and outs of wild survival. His gear was top-notch, and he needed a sturdy tent, a sleeping bag, and a reliable camp stove. Jack loved the quiet solitude of camping alone, away from the city's noise, and this trip was no different. He set up his campsite near a familiar creek, a peaceful spot he'd visited before. As the sun set, Jack built a small fire to stay warm. He knew preparation meant caution, especially in bear country. But this time, he didn't hang his food properly. One small mistake that would turn his peaceful night into a deadly encounter. As the night settled in, Jack retired to his tent to sleep. The forest was quiet, with only the rustling of leaves and the occasional call of an owl. Exhausted from the day's hike, Jack drifted into a deep sleep, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. However, a curious grizzly bear, drawn by the scent of Jack's food, wandered into his campsite late at night. The bear, hungry and on the lookout for an easy meal, began sniffing around the area. Jack was still asleep, oblivious to the bear's presence. But then, the bear's movements grew louder as it rummaged through Jack's gear, knocking over some of his belongings. The sound of the bear startled Jack, and he woke up in a panic. He quickly realized what was happening, and in fear tried to scare the bear off by shouting. But the bear, feeling threatened, reacted aggressively. It charged at Jack, knocking him to the ground with terrifying force. Before Jack could respond, the bear bit into his shoulder with its powerful jaws, causing intense pain. Jack struggled to free himself, but the bear's grip was strong. With all his strength, Jack managed to escape the bear's grasp, crawling toward a nearby stream. The water would give him some distance from the bear, and he hoped, confuse its sense of smell. But the bear, not deterred, continued to stalk him, following the sounds of Jack's movement. Busting heavily from the bite, Jack knew he needed to get away as quickly as possible. His body was weakening from the blood loss, but he kept moving, hoping to find safety. The next few hours were a blur of pain and fear for Jack. He managed to hide in the underbrush, hoping the bear would lose interest, but the wound on his shoulder was deep and growing weaker. As the night passed, Jack's chances of survival grew slimmer. The bear had retreated for the moment, but Jack knew he couldn't last much longer. On the second day, Jack's situation worsened. His wounds were severe, and he had lost a lot of blood. As he stumbled through the dense forest, he tried to find his way back to safety, but grew weaker with each step. His vision blurred, and he struggled to stay conscious. The once strong camper, who had been so prepared for his adventure, now faced a fight for survival against the very wilderness he had hoped to embrace. The grizzly prowling nearby had made it clear that Jack would not escape easily. The bear's attacks had left him with deep puncture wounds, and every step he took seemed to make the pain worse. He knew he needed help, but he was far from any help. His only option was to keep moving, hoping against hope that someone would find him before it was too late. Days passed. Jack had found a small stream, hoping the water would help him cool off and clean his wounds. But his strength was quickly fading, and every time he tried to get up, he felt his body give out. He was losing the fight, and the reality of his situation began to sink in. The days were getting longer, and the pain was unbearable. But Jack was determined to survive. He refused to give up, despite the odds being stacked against him. Eventually, his cries for help reached the ears of a group of searchers. They had been looking for him since he was reported missing. When they found him, he was barely conscious, his body covered in blood, his clothes torn from the bear's attack. They rushed to his side, quickly applying first aid before airlifting him to safety. Jack was rushed to a nearby hospital, where doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize him. Though Jack survived, the bear's attack left lasting physical and emotional scars. The deep puncture wounds on his shoulder and leg required multiple surgeries, and the blood loss had severely weakened his body. But not just the physical injuries would take time to heal. Jack's trauma was not only in his body, but in his mind. He would carry the memory of the bear's attack with him for the rest of his life. On a crisp autumn morning in late September 2024, seasoned hunter Ben set off into the remote forests of northern Wyoming, eager for another successful hunt. In his mid-40s, Ben had spent years in the wilderness, mastering the art of tracking and survival. With thick calluses on his hands and a steady hand with his rifle, he had gained a reputation as one of the most skilled hunters in the area. The rugged beauty of the Wyoming landscape had always called to him, and this time he was determined to find the perfect deer for the season. He knew the terrain well, having trekked through these forests countless times. However, he never imagined the danger that awaited him this time. Ben's experience had taught him to trust his instincts, but today, something felt off. The forest was eerily quiet, with no sounds of birds or small animals. Ben paused, listening carefully, but a fresh scent soon caught his attention. The carcass smell lingered in the air, and Ben, driven by curiosity, decided to investigate. His heart pounded as he moved closer, not knowing what he might find. As he neared the source of the smell, Ben crept through the underbrush. He pushed aside a few branches and found himself face to face with a massive grizzly bear hunched over a deer carcass. The bear, engrossed in its meal, had not noticed Ben's presence. His breath caught in his throat as he watched the powerful animal's fur, thick and matted from the long winter, tearing into the meat with its claws. At that moment, Ben made a fatal mistake. Instead of retreating quietly, he moved closer, eager for a better shot. His heart raced with excitement, and his normally reliable instincts betrayed him. The bear suddenly stopped, its head snapping toward him, its nostrils flaring as it caught the scent of a human intruder. Before Ben could react, the bear let out a terrifying growl and charged at him with frightening speed. Panic surged through Ben's body as he turned and sprinted toward the nearest tree, his rifle bouncing in its holster. He reached the tree but was not fast enough. The bear caught up to him, slamming into his back and knocking him to the ground. Ben struggled to get up, but the bear was too strong. It mauled him fiercely, sinking its teeth into his legs and back. His body was battered as the bear's claws raked through his flesh. Ben's rifle was out of reach, and he had only his hands to defend himself. Desperation filled him as he fought to escape the bear's grip. His mind raced, but his body was weakening. Blood flowed freely from the deep gashes in his legs and back, and his strength began to fade. The bear, sensing Ben's stillness, paused for a moment. Ben lay there, hoping that the bear would lose interest. After what seemed like an eternity, the bear finally retreated, disappearing back into the wilderness, leaving Ben lying on the forest floor, gravely injured. Ben's breathing was shallow as he lay there, struggling to stay conscious. His body was a mass of pain, but he knew he needed to act quickly. He reached for his rifle, but it was too far away. He managed to drag himself toward the tree line with great effort, hoping to find help before it was too late. The wilderness around him felt cold and distant, and Ben knew his only hope now was to survive long enough to be rescued. Ben's vision blurred as the pain from his injuries intensified. Every breath felt like a struggle, and the blood loss made it harder for him to focus. He dragged himself inch by inch through the thick underbrush, hoping for some sign of life. His hands shook, and his body felt weak, but his survival instincts kicked in. He knew that if he didn't keep moving, he would lose consciousness and never make it out. Hours passed, and the sun began to dip lower in the sky. Ben's progress was slow, and he could feel his strength fading. The sounds of the forest around him seemed distant, and he couldn't help but wonder if he would make it out alive. His legs were covered in deep claw marks, and his back felt like it was on fire from the bear's attack. He knew that even if he made it to the forest's edge, there was no guarantee he would find help in time. As the day turned to night, Ben's situation grew more dire. His mind was clouded with pain and fatigue, but he refused to give up. He had always prided himself on his ability to endure, but this was different. He had never faced anything like this before. Every movement was an effort, and his body screamed for rest. But he pushed on, driven by the hope that someone might find him before it was too late. Suddenly, the sound of a rustling nearby caught Ben's attention. His heart raced, but it wasn't the bear. It was the sound of a search party. The relief that flooded through him was overwhelming. He could hear voices now calling out, searching for him. He summoned what little strength he had left and tried to shout, but only a weak rasp escaped his lips. He tried again, but his voice barely carried through the dense trees. Finally, the searchers spotted him. They rushed to his side, immediately assessing the severity of his injuries. Ben could see the concern on their faces as they quickly stabilized him, wrapping his wounds to stop the bleeding. They had found him just in time. The pain was unbearable, but Ben knew he was safe now. Ben was airlifted out of the wilderness and rushed to the hospital. The doctors worked tirelessly to treat his injuries, and after several surgeries, he began to recover. His body had endured severe trauma, but his spirit remained unbroken. Despite the long recovery ahead, Ben was grateful for the second chance he had been given. The attack had left him with physical scars, but the emotional impact was just as profound. He would never forget the day he met the grizzly bear in the Wyoming wilderness.